I'd like to introduce Mellisa Dobrovic. She is, sorry, I'm trying to think. Basically, she offers counseling at SABDA, right? She's a volunteer, and she has been there for a couple of years now, and she'll be speaking about dealing with depression and also self-harm. All right, thank you. Please give her a round of applause.
Thanks. I still use the old school paper, and just as well because we had a power failure from about 2 in the morning, so my phone actually died. So thank goodness for old school. My name is Mellisa, and yes, part of my volunteer work that I do is for SABDA, the Schizophrenic and Bipolar Disorder Alliance, an NGO that my wonderful, I call her my Wonder Woman mom. She's the house mother of the SABDA house, which houses schizophrenic and bipolar sufferers. So basically how I found the NGO was during a time that I couldn't find any work, and I saw an ad in the paper asking for volunteers to attend arts and crafts classes for SABDA, and I started going to these classes just once a week at Tara Hospital, because previously I had been a patient in Tara myself. And funny enough, that just put me on a new road and actually changed my life. I'm currently also in the media and entertainment industry. I sort of fell into it by default. I come from a psychology background. I studied, I got my honors in psychology, which I got through UNISA. So how I basically ended up in the media industry is, again, I couldn't find any work, and I just graduated with my honors degree. And there was an ad in the paper in the government sector with the Film and Publication Board looking for content classifiers. And I'd never heard what a classifier was or actually did. All I could understand was the little triangle that I used to see on the back of DVDs with the age rating on. And it turns out that that's an actual job. So I went and applied thinking, I really don't think I'll get this, and got the post. I was one of 20 classifiers in South Africa, and it was quite a taxing job. We didn't have to be there every day, but as and when the content came into the country, we would have to screen it first and then give it its suitable age rating according to South African norms and standards. And so most people go, oh, well, you get paid to watch TV and watch movies. But there's a lot more to it, because you also have to understand the developmental processes of children and understand what sort of content will be harmful and so forth. What sort of spun me over the edge eventually is having to classify pornography. So all the pornography that comes into South Africa, we had to screen it as well to ensure that no children were being used in it. And just like the rest of the ladies, I also don't understand the concept of no. I just say yes to everything. So eventually at the FPB, I was made an assistant manager of operations, and I just said yes. I will go and do talks around the country on cyber safety, on child pornography, on this, on that. I will go and screen all the actual child pornography cases before they go to court, and that became extremely emotionally draining, just particularly because of the background I had come from and experienced. So also coming from a background where I was unable to hold down a job, sometimes not even for longer than a month, because of my mental illness, I was really proud that 5 years down the line I was still in this job. But it started really taking its toll on me, because as I say, I wasn't just doing my management duties, I was taking on everybody else's and really trying to be as strong as I could. And I'm also generally a person with a bubbly personality, but really when I know that when I can't sort of keep that facade up in the workplace, then I know that I'm in trouble and I need to get help. So eventually, as I say, it took its toll, and I did something that everybody said, how can you do? You've got a job in a government position. How can you just let it go? But I eventually resigned with nothing to fall back onto. And it was really difficult. When I'd initially got the job, I went, I've got a great government job. I'm going to buy myself a house, which I did. And obviously trying to pay a bond when you've got no job is not the easiest thing. But somehow I got through it, and 9 months later, I was employed in the private sector, but still as a content classifier, minus the pornography, thank goodness. So I still have quite an emotionally taxing job, because for 9 hours a day, more if I'm still unable to say no, I will screen all the content that goes onto streaming platforms. So I binge watch series on a daily basis. I don't get to choose, I don't like horror, so I won't watch this, I won't watch that. So that's my job, is watching all of this and writing a report, like a psychological assessment report for each title that I view and watch. And as I say, that in itself, funny enough, to this day, there actually hasn't been much research on the impact that it has on classifiers, because you're actually traumatizing your brain. It's called vicarious trauma. So your direct trauma would be, let's say you are hijacked. You are directly traumatized, you know that you have been traumatized, and you go and seek professional help. With vicarious trauma, you don't know that you're actually traumatizing your mind. So your trauma will start coming out in nightmares and funny behavior and depression and so forth. But you don't actually realize it's because of all watching so many violent acts, or watching rape scenes, or watching dramas with a lot of emotional content. So that is something I'm quite passionate about also in the future, is when and if I do get into a master's program, is possibly looking at how can classifiers, because it is a job around the world, there's a lot of classifiers, and what is the actual lifespan of a classifier? Is this a job I could do for the next 20 years, or is it something that I could possibly really burn out from? So I also feel there's still a very large stigma with mental illness, especially in the workplace. This year has been probably one of the most toughest years I've had to endure, not just because of my mental illness, but just I think Satan has been at work with my family in a huge way this year. It started off with my grandfather being diagnosed with cancer. My 7-year relationship then ended, and I was shattered and heartbroken. My grandfather then passed away sooner than we thought he would from the cancer. Then my dad had a stroke. After my dad's stroke, my ex, who was still living with me at the time, because again, I can't say no, just move out. I feel sorry. I got home, and my ex had tried to commit suicide. And only just last week, my youngest sister, who we were so excited about, she was about 6 months pregnant with what we thought was twins. She went into early labor, and it turned out she had triplets, but sadly she lost all 3 of them. And it's just been a roller coaster of emotions, and trying to hang on to my mental health and my stability has really been a challenge. I was diagnosed with my first mental illness when I was about 20 years ago. I also suffer from bipolar mood disorder too, so I completely understand the highs and lows, and my mania sometimes is very destructive and it's sometimes very constructive. So, I recently had a policy I cashed in, and I bought a ticket to Canada because that was one of my goals. I'd been saving up for about 10 years, and I went and I did it, but I also did it kind of on the spur of the moment as well. And I said that was one of my more constructive manic moments, because there's been times where I will just walk into a casino and start spending money because I'm having a manic moment. So what I've learned though, suffering from bipolar, and then also I was also diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. So your bipolar is more of a chemical imbalance in the brain, whereas your personality disorders are more behavior-based. It's things that you've learned over the years. So my coping mechanisms that I learned over the years, I thought they were very helpful at the time. But the more I sort of indulged in them and put myself through them, the more destructive they became in my life, and they started becoming destructive to the people around me as well. So the way I would sort of manage my depression was through cutting, a lot of self-harm, which I think to this day many people don't understand. And like I always say, unlike alcoholism or drug addiction, you wear your scars on your arms all the time. And that's been another thing of where I've gone for many job interviews, and the minute people see my arms, they just say, please leave, or we won't finish the interview. Particularly because I used to work with children a lot as well, so people need to really, really earn your trust. I was also bulimic and then anorexic. That used to be for me a way that I could falsely control the things in my life. If I had control over my food, I felt like I could control everything else that was falling apart around me. I also indulged a lot in marijuana and alcohol, and I think working in the media industry, it's quite difficult at times because we have a lot of social events, and I can see how my colleagues and my friends can drink and drink and drink and still be okay. I know that I have a limit. If I go over my limit, I know that I'm going to be suffering not just the next day with a hangover, but for a few days or weeks with depression. So I've got to really monitor on what I put into my body, how I actually cope with things. I think I was always predisposed to depression and bipolar and anxiety. My anxiety is sometimes off the charts, and people will always laugh because I've done so many talks around the country, not just about myself, but as I say, on cyber safety and so forth. And they always say, you're so calm, but really, like right now also, if you could know how my heart is beating, my mouth is dry, and I always just feel like I'm going to shake right off the stage. But I think I turned to cigarette smoking as well, and that's still one of my vices I'm up and down with, thinking that it gives you a false sense of security, saying this is helping me, this makes me feel less anxious, when I know the fact is that it really doesn't. Another big thing is sugar, and I cannot believe the impact that sugar can actually have on one's mental health, and I've proved it to myself over and over. Funny enough, we watched, I had to classify a documentary called That Sugar Film, and it was a guy who was really, really healthy, ate very well, and he decided for 2 weeks he was going to do a sugar binge and eat the average amount of sugar that your average human being eats on a daily basis. And the first thing to go was his mental health. He became very agitated, he became full of anxiety, and his moods were up and down. So they've actually done tests where you see if you don't have any sugar in your diet, your brain sort of stays on a middle ground platform. The minute you eat something with sugar, that shoots it up into your brain. So you have the high, the sugar-induced high, but then it doesn't crash down to the middle ground, it crashes lower, just like any other drug. And your brain immediately tells you, I need more sugar to get back up to that high. So you're always having these highs and lows, which for somebody with bipolar is really not a constructive thing. So it's also not easy these days, it's not a cheap thing to try and eat healthy and try and cut sugar out of your diet completely, but it's something that I try and do quite often. Also because I also know the benefits of exercise, but I'm not such a fan of exercise, so I try and sort of disguise it. I think like walking in the mall quite a bit will give me quite a bit of exercise. Working in my garden, that will give me some exercise, but I can see the difference as opposed to just sitting at home. But just also coming back to the stigma, it's quite interesting how my colleagues at the moment and my managers and that, I was called in the other day to say, you're not your bubbly personality, you're not your bubbly self. And although I haven't fallen apart at work, I do know that I'm obviously looking tired, and I'm not talking as much as I usually do and laughing as much as I usually do. So the answer has been, you must go work from home for a week, which fascinates me. It just shows me how people are still scared to talk about things like this, because I'm very open about my history. I'm very open about where I've been, because I always feel that if I can make a difference in one person's life, then my journey was actually worth it. Basically, as I say, by the time I was in my 20s, I started obsessing about depressive things. And that's another thing that can really bring you down. I was obsessed with Sylvia Plath, the poet, who inevitably committed suicide. I used to watch the movie Girl Interrupted over and over and over, identifying with these people, but also living my labels of mental illness. So everything became an excuse for me. I would always say, I can't go to a social event because I get too anxious. I can't work a full-time job because I get too tired. I can't do this because of my depression. And it became a perfect excuse to actually not live my life. And that's also become one of the hardest things for me to do, is go, I'm not identifying myself just as my mental illness. Yes, I suffer from A, B, and C, but I am not those things only. There's far more to me. And as I said, I couldn't hold down a job. I couldn't be friends to my friends. I couldn't be there for my family. I ended up in rehabs, drug rehabs, because at that stage also with self-mutilation, the professionals were trying to treat it a lot like a drug, which it sort of is like a drug because it gives you a high when you cut, but you can't treat it in exactly the same way because you can't just hide all the blades and razors and glass and so forth. So the rehab really didn't work for me, but I was in and out there 4 times, and eventually the money ran out, and I found myself the next time I tried something, and as I said, each time the cutting got worse and worse and worse. Before it was just little cuts. Before I knew it, I was being rushed into the emergency ward being stitched up because my first cut didn't give me the same high as it did before. And I ended up in the, what was then Joburg Gen, the Charlotte Max Hospital, in the psychiatric ward, which was another story. I mean, but I always say that saved my life because it took me out of my self-indulgent little moment that I was in. My mom had to do the hardest thing she's ever had to do, and she actually just cut off communication. She didn't come and visit me, and I know for her that must have broken her heart, but it is what I needed. I needed that tough love because I needed to make a choice and say, am I actually going to stand up and choose life, or am I going to choose death, or just choose to merely exist in the world? So I did Joburg Gen twice after the first time I was in there, and once you're in there, you're a patient of the state. So, you know, the state decides when you are going to be discharged. And you are in this ward, a lockdown ward. You're not allowed to walk around the hospital. There's a big jail door in the front. There's a security guard in the front. And you're not allowed to just lie in bed like you see people in Santon Clinic just lying in bed all day, you know. We used to call it the desperate housewife ward. But there you are with people off the streets, you know, people that are just talking, you know, garbled messages and so forth. But those people became my friends because within their mental illnesses, I could see that there was some worth in me too. And after that, I was put into Tara Hospital for 3 months, and I was 20 years old at that stage. But what also became difficult for me is that those became my safe places, the institutions, and that would also become my option. Okay, if life gets too much, I'm just going to go back to hospital. Which for me also had its own set of consequences with it, you know. So after the second time that I was put in Ward 487 in Joburg Gen, I then had the option to go back into Tara Hospital, but I'd also been offered a job as a nursery school teacher. So the easiest option would have been go back to Tara. But I took the option as a nursery school teacher, and that also just changed my life. I'd lost everybody around me, but this getting up early was still not one of my strong fortes, but I had to be up early for these children. I only had 5 children. I was teaching the grade R class. But those 5 children gave me unconditional love. And I always say that when I'm in a down space, I just need to spend one day with children, just to also remember how grateful I am to be alive, because children don't judge. You know, they would look at my arms and just go, you know, Teacher Mellisa, why are you so pale? Don't you go to the tanning bed? You know, things like that. So I've only got 3 minutes, and there's always so much to be able to say. But I just want to all ask you to please just close your eyes for 2 minutes. Take a deep breath in, let it out. Now I just want you to focus on what you hear around you, what you can smell, what you can taste, what you can see behind your closed eyes, what you can feel. Okay, and open your eyes again. So this might seem like a simple, arbitrary exercise, but it's something I do almost on a daily basis. And this was something I learned in DBT therapy. DBT therapy is also known as dialectical behavior therapy. And it was developed by Dr. Marsha Linehan, an American psychologist. And it is one of the most effective group therapies that you can actually attend. And it's available in South Africa in private and government sectors. And it basically just teaches people that are suffering from depression, anxiety, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, to be able to live in the moment. So when you are freaking out, when you're having a panic attack, when you're having anxiety, and I'll do this at work, I'll just go to the bathroom cubicle and I'll just, sit there. and just take a few deep breaths and just concentrate on your 5 senses. And believe me, it works every time. You're not then panicking about what's just happened, you're not worrying about what's going to happen, but it just centers you and puts you back in the moment. So, yeah, as I say, I could talk for ages and ages, but it's been a matter of me learning new coping mechanisms. And like anything, a new habit takes a while to develop. So I'm seeing that more positive and healthy coping mechanisms, they're the harder choice. They take a lot more work, but in the long run, they are much more worth it. And at the end of each year, I sort of gauge or measure my success with a few questions that I ask myself, which is probably not what your average everyday person or how they would gauge their success. But I say to myself, in the past 12 months, have I cut myself? Have I ended up in hospital? Have I tried to kill myself? And have I managed to hold down the same job? Sometimes I don't always answer no or yes to all of those things, but if I have maybe slipped up, I then try and not ridicule myself with guilt and shame, but I say, I'm just going to try a bit harder next year. And that's my main message, is that we're all going to slip up. We're all going to have issues in life that whack us without us even realizing. But the main thing is, can you still get up in the morning, put your makeup on, get dressed, and even if it's not being the bubbly personality, can you just be honest with people and just be able to get through a day? And at the end of the day, that in itself is a huge achievement. So thank you very much for this initiative, Dobrovic.